This canine police dog shocked everyone by attacking the judge in the courtroom. In a high-stakes trial that could bring down a notorious gang, Officer Sienna Morgan and her canine partner, Blaze, are thrust into a deadly web of corruption. As Blaze reacts violently to the judge, Sienna uncovers a dark secret linking the judge to the gang. Now, with enemies closing in, Sienna must race against time to expose the truth before it's too late. The heavy wooden doors of the courtroom swung open, and the room quieted instantly. In the center, a sleek German shepherd, Blaze, sat poised at his handler's side. His coat gleamed under the bright lights, every muscle in his body taut with focus. Officer Sienna Morgan, tall and calm, stood beside him, a hand resting lightly on his harness. The atmosphere in the courtroom was thick with anticipation. This was no ordinary trial. This was the one that could bring down the notorious Vale Street Gang, the criminals responsible for a string of brutal murders. Everyone present knew that the case was built on the testimony of the dog at her side. Prosecutor Evan Clark stood tall at his podium, his voice steady and confident. He had spent years preparing for this moment. His case was airtight, or so he believed. The evidence was clear. The gang members were already behind bars, and now it was time to seal the deal with Blaze's demonstration. The judge, Caleb Richardson, a respected man with decades of service, glanced at Blaze, then at the evidence laid out on the table before him. The blood-stained knife, the murder weapon, was on full display. "Blaze," Sienna called softly, her voice low yet commanding. The dog's ears flicked forward, and his keen eyes focused on the knife. His nose twitched. This was the moment that would decide everything. Judge Richardson, ever the professional, leaned forward to inspect the evidence closer. His fingers hovered over the handle of the knife, but before he could touch it, Blaze let out a growl, deep, threatening, and unprovoked. A rush of tension spread like wildfire through the room. Sienna's eyes widened, and before she could react, Blaze sprang toward the judge with a force that was terrifying. His teeth bared, the dog lunged, barking furiously. The courtroom erupted into chaos. People scrambled out of their seats, some knocking over chairs, others shouting in panic. Sienna yanked hard on Blaze's leash, trying to regain control, but the dog's aggression only intensified. His fur bristled as he snapped, narrowly missing the judge's arm. A deep voice from the back shouted for security, and within moments, two burly officers rushed to help, dragging Blaze back. Judge Richardson staggered back from the bench, his face pale but otherwise unharmed. He took a few seconds to regain his composure before standing slowly, his eyes never leaving Blaze. The room fell into an eerie silence, a thick tension hanging in the air. No one knew exactly what had just happened. The judge, his hands shaking, gestured for the officers to escort him out of the room. Sienna quickly moved to Blaze's side, her heart racing, but her voice was steady. "Get him out of here. Now," she ordered. The officers didn't hesitate. The room remained in tense stillness as they escorted the judge away. Sienna knelt beside Blaze, her hand gently patting his fur. She could feel the muscle in his back twitching beneath her fingers, a clear sign of his heightened senses. But something was wrong. This wasn't just a random outburst. Blaze had never acted like this before. Once the court had settled and the trial resumed, Sienna sat quietly, her eyes scanning Blaze. The dog's eyes, usually so calm, now held a sharp, almost panicked gleam. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was something deeper at play. She couldn't explain it, but the way Blaze had reacted, it wasn't normal. The scent of the room seemed to change as she mulled over the events in her head. Later that night, in the quiet of the K9 unit's office, Sienna pored over every report, every piece of evidence tied to the case. She analyzed the blood-stained knife, turning it over carefully. Something caught her attention. There was a scent lingering on the blade, faint but unmistakable. She had seen it before on another piece of evidence in the case. But where? Blaze had reacted to it. That much was clear. The smell was too subtle for most people to detect, but Blaze, with his heightened senses, had honed in on it as if it was a signal. It didn't make sense. Could the judge? Could he be involved? Sienna's thoughts raced as she recalled how Judge Richardson had always seemed so above suspicion. But now, with the events of the day weighing heavily on her, Sienna felt a cold thread of doubt twist around her. She spent hours working late, comparing the evidence to Blaze's past cases. There was no doubt in her mind now. Blaze had smelled something on the knife, something dangerous, something connected to the Vale Street gang. But more troubling than that, the scent had a direct link to Judge Richardson. This wasn't an accident. Blaze had reacted for a reason. He had smelled something tied to the judge. The next day, Sienna gathered her courage and presented her findings to her superiors. But when she suggested the possibility that Judge Richardson might be connected to the gang, they dismissed her concerns outright. The judge was too respected, too important to the legal system. They told her Blaze's behavior was nothing more than a random outburst, an unfortunate accident. Sienna wasn't convinced. Something inside her told her she had to dig deeper. Blaze wasn't wrong. In the days that followed, Sienna began to track the judge's movements. She observed him from a distance, noting the places he frequented, the people he met. Each time she got close to one of his meetings, Blaze's behavior grew more erratic. The growls became more frequent. The dog's attention fixated on certain areas, as though he could smell the danger on the air. One evening, after Blaze had reacted violently outside the judge's office, Sienna decided to take action. She couldn't shake the suspicion gnawing at her, the feeling that she was on the edge of something far darker than anyone realized. Under the cover of night, Sienna approached Judge Richardson's house. She had to know what he was hiding. Inside, the air felt thick, and every step she took seemed to echo in the silence. Blaze was more agitated than ever before, his growls low and constant. As she quietly moved through the judge's study, she saw the open case files spread out across the desk. Judge Richardson had been handling them with a personal interest, files marked with the Vale Street gang's name. Blaze's low growl turned into a deep, menacing sound, his body tense, his nose pushing toward the pages. It was then that Sienna saw it. Hidden within the case files were stacks of money, money that didn't belong to the court, money that could only be traced back to illegal dealings. The truth slammed into Sienna like a freight train. The judge wasn't just linked to the gang. He was actively working with them, passing information in exchange for power and wealth. Blaze had known it all along. The dog's instincts had detected the criminal scent on the judge himself, something no one else could have sensed. Sienna had stumbled upon something bigger than she had ever imagined. The judge wasn't just a part of the system. He was a part of the very darkness that had plagued the city for years. Sienna's mind raced as she pieced the fragments together. The image of Blaze's sudden aggression in the courtroom flashed in her memory. There had been no warning, no indication that the dog would snap. But the truth now seemed as clear as the bloodstains on the knife Blaze had reacted to. The canine's behavior had never been random. It had been purpose-driven, primal. Blaze wasn't just protecting her. He was protecting the truth, and the truth was far more dangerous than anyone had realized. The next morning, as she walked into the small police station where she had worked for years, a new heaviness pressed on her chest. Judge Richardson was in custody now. She felt relieved that higher authorities took actions on her reports, but she knew this was only the beginning. "Have you heard?" her colleague, Officer Cruz, asked, breaking her concentration. His voice was low, almost a whisper, as if afraid someone might overhear. The judge didn't just give up information. He was involved in orchestrating murders. Unsanctioned hits. They were all tied to the gang. Sienna nodded, her eyes narrowing as the weight of the words sank in. The gang wasn't just pulling strings from the shadows. They had operatives within the system. And now, it seemed that Richardson had been one of their top players. She looked down at Blaze, sitting quietly by her feet, his eyes alert. It was as if he already knew the next step. His fur was still bristling from the tension of the last few days, the bond between them growing stronger with each passing minute. The thought of that bond, unspoken but so deeply rooted, gave her strength. Blaze wasn't just a dog, he was a partner in every sense. His instincts had been her guide through the darkest moments, and now she had to trust them more than ever. The investigation deepened as Sienna and Blaze sifted through mountains of documents, interview transcripts, and surveillance footage. The more they dug, the more it became apparent that the corruption ran deep. Blaze reacted at every turn. His nose would twitch, his eyes would lock onto something in the room, as if the very scent of betrayal was etched into the air. One night, as they reviewed footage of Richardson meeting with gang members at a shadowy bar, Blaze growled low, a deep rumble vibrating through his chest. His eyes followed the movements of the screen, his focus never wavering. Sienna leaned forward, noting his reaction. Something about this meeting felt wrong, even for Richardson. The words on the screen were inaudible, but Blaze's response was enough to confirm it. Blaze's growl grew louder. He was not only sensing the criminal ties, but something else, something darker. His heightened senses were picking up on the faintest details that human eyes miss. The flick of a finger, the subtle exchange of a look, the scent of illegal money passing hands. Blaze's instincts were on another level. As the investigation progressed, so did the threats. Unseen but ever present, the criminal organization began to target Sienna. It started with cryptic phone calls, silent and void of emotion. Then came the subtle gestures. A car tailing her as she drove home, someone lurking just beyond her line of sight at a coffee shop. The gang was onto her, and they weren't going to let her uncover their secrets without a fight. Sienna knew the pressure was rising, but with Blaze by her side, she refused to back down. They moved from safe house to safe house, constantly on the move, knowing that staying in one place for too long would make them an easy target. The more Sienna investigated, the more she realized that not only was the judge deeply entangled with the gang, but so were several high-ranking officials. The system had been compromised from the inside, and the reach of the gang seemed endless. One evening, Blaze became unusually restless. He paced the safe house, his sharp eyes scanning every corner, his nose twitching incessantly. Sienna could feel the unease radiating from him. She had learned to trust his instincts, and right now, they were telling her that danger was near. "Stay close, Blaze," she whispered, tightening her grip on his leash. She knew that wherever they weren't safe for long. Hours passed, and the silence in the safe house grew thicker. Then, at last, the phone rang. It was a block of static followed by the voice of a man she didn't recognize. "You've seen too much, Officer Morgan," the voice said coldly. "You and your dog are going to pay the price for your meddling." The line went dead. Sienna's pulse quickened, but she didn't panic. She had been through enough to know that fear wasn't going to help her now. She turned to Blaze, who was already positioned at the door, his nose pressed to the crack. He was ready, and so was she. They packed up and left in the dead of night, heading straight for the last place, an abandoned warehouse on the edge of town. The place smelled of rust, oil, and something sharp, decay lingering in the forgotten corners. The windows were dark, the air heavy with dust, and every step they took felt like an echo of danger. This was where the gang had chosen to make their final stand. Blaze's body was tense, his fur standing on end as he detected the faintest traces of human presence. His nose twitched, and he moved with purpose, leading Sienna down a narrow path toward the center of the warehouse. The shadows seemed to press in closer, their silence a stark contrast to the adrenaline building in Sienna's chest. As they moved deeper into the warehouse, the hairs on the back of her neck prickled. Blaze's growl broke the silence, a warning, but it was too late. From the darkened corners, the gang's leaders emerged, weapons drawn. The first shots rang out, deafening in the stillness. Blaze leaped into action, his massive frame knocking one of the assailants off balance. His teeth flashed, and with a swift snap, he disarmed another. Sienna ducked behind a pile of old crates, her mind racing through every move she had learned. Blaze's instincts were spot on, and every time a threat emerged, he was there, guiding her through the chaos. The gunfire was constant, but Sienna kept her focus. She could hear Blaze growls, his teeth clashing with those who dared to come too close. The heavy echo of gunshots cracked through the stagnant air, a sharp reminder of the danger they were in. Each blast was followed by the rattle of metal, the scraping of boots across the warehouse's uneven concrete floor, the stench of rust, oil, and a chemical tang that hung like a weight in the air. The oppressive darkness of the warehouse swallowed the sound of their movements, making it feel as though time had slowed to a crawl. But in this disorienting chaos, Sienna's senses were razor-sharp, her every action precise. Blaze's growls were low but persistent, an undercurrent to the violence unfolding around them. His body was a mass of controlled muscle, his fur bristling with energy as he darted in and out of the shadows, a living weapon. Every time a gang member tried to raise their gun, Blaze was there, his jaws snapping, forcing them to rethink their actions. He moved with a practiced grace, his nose twitching as he anticipated every move before it even happened. Sienna knew exactly when Blaze was preparing to strike, his body tense, eyes locked on his target. She moved with him, ducking behind rusted crates, each corner she rounded filled with the scent of decay and years of neglect. Her mind was clear, calculating the next move even as she darted between pillars, taking cover just long enough to neutralize another threat. A shout pierced the air, a brief moment of distraction, a flurry of movement, and then another shot rang out. She ducked instinctively, her body blending into the darkness, fingers steady on her weapon. Blaze surged forward again, and with a sharp snarl, he disarmed another gang member, sending the man sprawling to the floor. The sound of his body hitting the concrete echoed around them like a slap against the stillness. Blaze's sharp teeth were bared, his muzzle pulled back in a fierce snarl. He wasn't just a weapon, he was her partner, and together, they were unstoppable. The air was thick with the smell of gunpowder and sweat, the metallic tang of blood beginning to mix with the dust and rust that clung to every surface. The clamor of the struggle seemed to reverberate in her bones, the tension rising higher with every second that passed. Blaze's growl intensified, signaling that they were getting closer. He had caught the scent. The leader was near, and Blaze was already ahead of her, his body moving with a fluid, calculated grace. They rounded another corner, and Sienna saw him. The gang leader, tall and cloaked in shadows, was making his way toward the back of the warehouse, his steps quickening as he realized the trap was closing in. His face was a mask of panic, but there was no escape for him now. Just as the leader bolted toward a side door, Blaze was on him, his powerful body launching forward in one smooth motion. The air around them seemed to thicken, the scent of desperation and fear flooding Sienna's senses as Blaze tackled the man to the ground with a bone-crushing force. The leader's scream was drowned out by Blaze's low, rumbling growl. There was no chance for him to flee. Blaze had anticipated his every move, tracking the scent of his fear through the warehouse like a shadow in the night. Sienna was right behind them, her weapon ready, her movements precise. She approached the leader, who was now pinned under Blaze's powerful frame, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The man struggled, but it was futile. Blaze's jaws were firm around his arm, the dog's eyes locking with Sienna's. She nodded once, her hand steady as she placed the barrel of her gun against the man's temple. "You're done," Sienna said, her voice calm despite the chaos that had unfolded around them. The man's eyes were wide, the last vestige of control slipping from him as he realized there was no escaping the inevitable. But just as Sienna prepared to make the arrest, her phone buzzed. It was a call from Internal Affairs. She answered immediately, her attention still on the gang leader beneath Blaze. "Officer Morgan," a voice crackled through the phone. "The full extent of Judge Richardson's corruption has been uncovered. All his ties to the gang, everything. The investigation is complete. His network is being dismantled as we speak." Sienna's heart stilled for a moment. She glanced down at Blaze, his eyes still locked on the gang leader, unblinking, unwavering. The truth was finally out. Everything she and Blaze had uncovered, the betrayal, the lies, the hidden webs of corruption, was being exposed for the world to see. The leader, now realizing his fate, let out a sharp laugh, a sound that felt out of place in the air filled with tension and the smell of sweat and blood. "You think you've won?" He spat, his voice venomous. "You're too late." Blaze growled again, a low and final warning, as if to say, "You're already finished." Sienna didn't flinch. Her grip tightened on her gun, and with a single, precise motion, she cuffed the leader. The battle was over. The gang was broken. Judge Richardson's betrayal had been exposed, and the corrupt system was finally being torn apart, piece by piece. As the remaining officers arrived, Sienna took a step back, watching the scene unfold. Blaze stood proudly at her side, his chest rising and falling with each steady breath. The chaos had ended, but there was no time to relax, not yet. The network that had brought so much destruction was being dismantled. The corrupt system that had long protected the guilty was falling apart, but Sienna knew the fight wasn't over. There would be more to do, more to uncover. Sienna walked away from the wreckage, Blaze at her side, his eyes alert, ever watchful. The weight of the night hung over her, but there was a new sense of clarity, a new understanding between them. The bond they shared was undeniable. It wasn't just about duty or training, it was trust, pure and simple. Blaze had saved her life more times than she could count, but it wasn't just his strength or his sharp instincts that had made the difference. It was their connection. Together, they had taken down the gang, but more importantly, they had exposed the truth. As they walked away from the wreckage, Sienna's thoughts drifted back to the days before all of this had begun, to the endless questions and the creeping feeling that something was wrong. The world had changed, but with Blaze by her side, Sienna knew that no matter what came next, they would face it together. There was no longer any doubt. Justice had been served, and the truth had been set free. Sienna looked down at Blaze, the loyal companion who had stood by her through it all. Without a word, they shared a quiet moment, a moment that spoke volumes. They had made a difference,